At 15, my parents ditched me for their chosen child, and the night they packed my suitcase, they didn't even look me in the eye. My mother stood in the doorway of my room, arms folded, watching my father pull hangers from the closet like he was clearing out a guest's things after an inconvenient visit. Downstairs, my younger brother laughed at something on television, the sound floating up the staircase, bright, careless, untouched. "You'll understand one day," my father said, sliding my shoes into a trash bag. "We have to prioritize what makes sense." What made sense was him, the athlete, the golden one, the investment. I was the distraction. The unnecessary expense. The daughter who asked too many questions and won too few trophies. They drove me to my aunt's apartment that night. No argument. No tears. Just a receipt of responsibility transferred. As the car pulled away, I stood under the flickering streetlight, suitcase at my feet, realizing something quietly permanent. They hadn't lost a daughter. They had discarded her. My name stopped being spoken in our house long before I physically left it. I was the quiet one, not because I lacked opinions, but because no one stayed long enough to hear them. My brother, Daniel, was their chosen child. Coaches called during dinner. Trophies lined the mantel. My mother memorized his statistics the way other parents memorized birthdays. When I brought home a regional writing award at 14, my father nodded once and asked if it came with a scholarship. It never did. I learned early that attention in our home was transactional. Performance earned praise. Potential earned investment. I was labeled independent, which really meant low maintenance, the child who wouldn't complain when her needs were postponed, then quietly forgotten. By 15, I understood the hierarchy. Daniel's training fees came before my school trips. His travel tournaments replaced my piano lessons. When money tightened, it was my future that adjusted. They didn't hate me. That would have required energy. I was simply inefficient. So when they left me at my aunt's apartment with a suitcase and a rehearsed explanation about difficult decisions, I didn't beg. I didn't cry. I did something far more dangerous. I started paying attention. The small betrayals were never loud. They came wrapped in reasonable tones and careful pauses. On my 16th birthday, a card arrived in the mail. No gift. Just my mother's looping handwriting, "Proud of you. Stay focused." Daniel's birthday that same year filled my social feed with a catered party, balloons in our old living room, my father's arm draped proudly across his shoulders. I studied the photo longer than I meant to, noticing how naturally my space had been edited out. When I made honor roll at my new school, I called home. My father let the phone ring twice before answering. "That's good," he said, distracted. In the background, I heard a whistle and the thud of a basketball. "Your brother has scouts coming next week." Everything I achieved felt like a footnote to his headline. Even years later, when I won my first national internship, my mother's response was measured. "That's ambitious," she said. A pause. "Just don't burn out. You've always been intense. Intense. Difficult. Independent." They never raised their voices. They didn't need to. Every compliment carried a ceiling. Every conversation tilted back toward him. And with each quiet dismissal, something inside me hardened, not into anger but into resolve. The turning point didn't arrive with applause. It came in the form of an email. I was 23, sitting alone in a dim library corner, my laptop balanced on a stack of borrowed textbooks I could barely afford. When the subject line appeared, "Offer letter attached," I stared at it for a full minute before opening it. The salary was more than my parents had ever earned combined. I didn't cry. I didn't gasp. I just exhaled long and steady like I'd been holding my breath for 8 years. That night, I called home. Not for approval, just to observe. My father answered. I told him the company name, the position, the city. There was a silence I hadn't heard before. Not distraction. Not dismissal. Calculation. "That's impressive," he said carefully. In the background there was no whistle, no game commentary. Just quiet. For the first time the headline was mine. And in that pause, I understood something clearly. They hadn't invested in me because they didn't see a return. I had been written off as a loss. Now I was an asset. Enough was enough. I stopped trying to prove my worth to them. From that day forward, I began building something they couldn't access. Not my resume, not my address, not my inner world. Success wasn't my revenge. Access was. Success gave me leverage. Discipline turned it into strategy. I moved cities without announcing it. New number. New address. My social media accounts shifted from open windows to frosted glass. I didn't block them, I limited them. Silence is more unsettling than rejection. When my contract renewed, I met with a financial advisor and an attorney. Not because I expected conflict, but because I understood patterns. I structured my assets under a trust. Beneficiaries clearly named. Access clearly defined. No ambiguity. No emotional loopholes. I paid off my student loans quietly. Built investments steadily. Learned the language of equity, ownership, protection. The same way my parents once studied Daniel's statistics, I studied compounding interest and liability clauses. Every holiday invitation they sent received a polite, delayed response. Work commitments. Travel. Deadlines. All true. Just strategically prioritized. Then the shift happened. My mother began calling more often. My father asked detailed questions about my company. Daniel's career, once blazing, had stalled after an injury. The scouts stopped calling. Their tone softened. Not loving, assessing. I never confronted them about the past. I didn't need to. I simply refused to offer what they now wanted. Proximity, influence, security. They had once categorized me as expendable. I made sure my world reflected the same logic. Not cruelty. Just boundaries, documented and enforced. They came to my office on a Tuesday. No warning. Just a message from reception. Your parents are here. I watched them on the lobby monitor before going down. My mother adjusted her coat nervously. My father studied the marble floors, the glass walls, the company logo mounted in steel behind the desk. Daniel stood slightly behind them, hands in his pockets, no longer the headline, just a footnote. When I stepped out of the elevator, their faces shifted. Pride, yes. But beneath it, need. I listened. No interruptions. No raised voice. When they finished, I slid a folder across the table. Inside, a neatly printed document outlining a small one-time financial gift, structured, final, non-recurring. No shared accounts. No co-signatures. No partnership. This is what I'm comfortable offering, I said evenly. My mother's smile faltered. My father read every clause. For the first time, they understood. They hadn't raised an opportunity. They had raised a boundary. My mother's hands trembled first. Not dramatically, just enough to ripple the paper as she turned the final page. My father's jaw tightened, the way it used to when I asked for something he'd already decided to deny. A gift? He repeated quietly. That's how you see us? I held his gaze. That's what I can responsibly offer. Daniel didn't argue. He leaned back in his chair and looked at me with something unfamiliar, not resentment, not pride. Recognition. He understood the language of contracts. He'd signed enough of his own. They left without slamming doors. Without a scene. Just slower than they'd entered. Within weeks, extended relatives began calling. Careful questions wrapped in concern. Your parents are struggling. Family should help family. The narrative shifted subtly. I was now the successful daughter who had changed. Reputation is fragile in families. Especially when money redraws loyalty. But here's the part that mattered. For the first time in my life, my self-worth wasn't being negotiated in a living room or compared to someone else's achievements. The stakes were never about the money. They were about access. About who gets to step into the world you built after being told you wouldn't build one at all. And if you've ever been underestimated, you understand why that boundary isn't cruelty. It's survival. In the months that followed, the noise faded. The calls slowed. The subtle guilt softened into distance. My parents learned slowly that I would not be maneuvered back into the role they'd once assigned me. The expendable one, the adjustable one. I didn't feel triumph. Revenge, at least the loud kind, burns hot and fast. What I felt was steadier than that. A quiet equilibrium. I kept building. Expanded the company division I led. Mentored interns who reminded me of myself at 15. Sharp, overlooked, waiting for someone to see them. I bought an apartment with windows that faced the sunrise, a deliberate choice. I liked the symbolism of starting fresh every morning. Sometimes I think about that streetlight outside my aunt's building. The flicker, the suitcase, the sound of my parents' car driving away. For years, I believed that moment defined my abandonment. Now I understand it defined my beginning. They chose a child who reflected their expectations. I chose a life that reflected my value. And the most satisfying part isn't that they can't enter my world. It's that I no longer need them to witness it.